Once we have the front brakes done, we can come to the rear brakes. The rear drum comes off differently than the front. First thing you have to do on the rear is remove the rear nut lock pin, and then you have to break the center axle nut loose, which will require some effort.
Okay, hold.
Okay. The rear axle nut is on at over 250 pounds, so to do this job, you need a 36mm socket with a long handled bar. You need your friend to be pulling on the brake pedal to stop the car from rolling, and if necessary, you'll need to jam the wheel. Once that's all in place, you can press steady and constantly down on the bar, and the nut will come loose, and you can start to undo it to take the wheel off. Okay, we've placed the car up on a jack stand. We can now take the nut off because it's finger tight. And the similar part to the front now is that you just slide the drum straight off of the axle. We're ready for the brake inspection. As with the front shoes, we'll clean everything off. We'll check and make sure there's no leak at our wheel cylinders. Make sure that we have lots of brake shoe material left. Make sure our adjusters are free. Once we clean this up, we're ready to put it back together, and we adjust the brakes as we did on the front.
Go.
Once we've inspected the rear brakes and everything is good, we've removed the drum from the wheel to make it easier to put the drum back on in place. We've looked inside. We have no cracks, no dirt, anything that's causing any trouble in there. We can slide the drum back on, getting it on the splines. We need to snug the nut back down. It doesn't have to be fully tight, but it needs to be snugged back down before we start the brake adjustment so that the drum is being held in place and not walking around. Same procedure on the rear as on the front. The adjusting screws are right-hand thread. You're turning the nut, so all you have to do is turn the nut to bring the shoe closer to the drum. Also the same as we did before. Your partner gives you a hand as we turn the drum to center the shoes. He pumps on the brake pedal. We check the shoes. We go and recheck the front shoe now, finish the adjustment on it. Turn it again to make sure it's nice and straight. Very good, and we have our shoes brought back out close to the drum on the rear.
Okay then.
Once we have our shoes adjusted back out, we're ready to bleed the rear wheel cylinders the same as we did on the front. Exact same process. Have your partner pump the pedal about 3 times, hold it down, crack it loose, bleed it looking for air. Do this process about 3 times, lock it up, make sure your wheel cylinder, your master cylinder, doesn't get low, and you're ready to go to the other side.
All right, go.
Once we have the car off the stands, back on the ground, we can tighten the center axle nut back up again. Minimum torque on the center axle nut is 250 pounds, but you have to line up the hole in the axle to get the safety pin back in. Best thing you can do is crank it down to get to the 250 pounds, and if you have to go slightly farther to make it tighter, to get the pin to fit in, it's what you want to do. At this point in time, you'll have to have your partner holding the brakes and possibly the wheel jammed, and you crank the wheel down until we can get the pin to fit in. And in it goes, and we're good. Next thing we look for in our front end inspection is looseness, movement in the front wheels. The best way to check this is with the car on the ground, the wheel tight, put your knee up against the wheel and pull in a back and forth motion to see if there's any movement. The first one to check, if there's movement down in here, this would be in the kingpin, which would require bushings being changed. If there's movement at the top, it's link pin. We can loosen the pinch bolt, turn the link pin to tighten it back up, and bring us back into removing the play. While you're looking at this, you just want to check your tie rod ends and make sure that there's no play in your tie rod ends. You want to take the 2 wrenches and check and make sure that the through bolt is tight, holding everything together. And the other place to look for movement on the front of your car is down on the top trailing arm where the torsion bar, sway bar goes in, and make sure that there's no play in the end up there. If movement has been found in the sway bar, we have to adjust it. The easiest way to do this is you undo the grub screw nut on the front, which is a 19mm wrench. You use an 8mm Allen key into the grub screw. The pinch bolt gets released, and then you gradually bring it down to snug it until the free play is gone out of the top trailing arm. And we have no movement here, but it's not too tight that the spacer can't turn. We have it right. Then you lock the Allen key back down again, and you tighten the jam nut, and the play will be gone from the sway bar, and you won't have any movement or camber change in the wheel because it's come loose. Okay. Be sure to tighten the tie rod bolts. They have a habit of coming loose. Make sure that they don't have to be over tightened, but make sure everything is snug and tight. And once this is all in good shape, we can go around. We want to check the steering box. The steering box should have been referenced when it was initially had the first alignment done. There'll be a marker indicating where the box should be sitting on the beam. The two bolts that go through the clamp on the bottom to hold the box in place. You want to make sure that the bolts going into those are tight. As long as the box hasn't rotated or moved, you just want to make sure it gets pinched back down. These are an item that will come loose, and they need to be checked all the time whenever you're doing maintenance. So it's important to make sure that the box is always in the right spot, because as it tips down, not only will your alignment change, but in certain cars, the pedals will interfere with the tie rods. The brake pedal may interfere with the pitman arm, so it's important that you check these things every time you work on the car.
Okay.
Before we leave the front end, we'll want to check full throttle at the carburetor. It'll take your partner to give you a hand with this. All these cars have some sort of cooling duct coming to the oil cooler. It's important that it's always there in place. Different styles for different cars, but make sure it's there. You can move this stuff out of the way. What you want to be able to do is have a look straight down into your carburetor to make sure that the throttle plate is standing straight up and down when the pedal is down on the stop. If your partner pulls the pedal down to the stop, you should be able to look in and see that the plate is vertical, straight up and down, no restriction. You have wide open throttle.
Okay, go ahead, pop it off. Okay. Go ahead.
Continuing the nut and bolt inspection, the exhaust system will come loose sometimes, but you have to remember that you're going into an alloy aluminum head. You do not want to over tighten it, but you want to make sure that the nuts are snug on the exhaust system so that it doesn't come loose on you. The next thing, continue on back to the rear suspension. The push rods pick up points on the rear suspension. All the nuts need to be checked to make sure that they're still tight. Depending on the style of system you have, you may have pivot bolts that do not need to be tightened all the way down, but you'll have to know this for your specific car when you go to work on it. But usually everything else on the system will have to be tight and snug so that there's no free play in anything. While you're at the back, the other thing you want to check is the free play in your clutch. Make sure that there's somewhere between 1/16 of an 1/8 of an inch for free play in the system. If everything is good that way, then we bleed the clutch the same as we do with the brakes. You'll need your partner to pump the pedal for you. You crack the bleeder loose. Same thing, go about 3 pumps on this, hold it, bleed it, do that about 3 times. Make sure there's no air bubbles in it. Check again after you've locked it up to make sure your free play is still good, your clutch is adjusted.